In addition to saying that America was founded on Enlightenment principles, Brooke Allen makes a second point, and she argues that God was a very minor player in the history of the founding of America. Now, how much evidence does someone need in order to disprove a statement like that? Not a whole lot. In fact, if we were to go back and look at the history of America and looking at the founding documents and statements by many of the leaders in the founding of America, we would see that her statement is bogus. So that's what we will do. And even if we start with 1776, her claim is easily disproved, since the Declaration of Independence includes 4 direct statements referencing God. But as we've seen in previous sessions, when America wasn't founded just in 1776, America has had a long history going all the way back to Jamestown in 1607. And all the colonial charters, and as we've seen, all of the statements of the state constitutions prior to the drafting of the Constitution in 1787, in some way or fashion reflected what we know today as Christian principles. Some of them so stark in their statements that in North Carolina's Constitution, the person couldn't hold political office unless that person believed in the authority of both the Old and the New Testaments. Now, let's just look at the Declaration of Independence and take the 4 statements in the Declaration of Independence which mention God. And almost everybody recognizes that the Declaration of Independence is based upon a belief that God is the center of our universe. Now, it's not a specifically Christian document, and we all have to admit as Christians that Jesus Christ is not mentioned. And there's, I think, some basic reasons for this. Any mention of God in the early founding was a reference to Christianity, and since the majority of those who signed the Declaration of Independence were Christians, they saw no problem of simply referencing the Creator, divine providence, the judge of the universe, as indications of course, this is what we believe, this is what we all believe about the God of the Bible. So let's just look at these 4 statements. Of course, the most popular one is that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And then there's the other one, that the laws of nature and of nature's God, appealing to the supreme judge of the world, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. And of course, you will see in this particular document that this is not a deist document. You don't have a divine providence principle written into a document if in fact you are a deist. You can't have a supreme judge of the world if you're a deist. A deist is someone who believes that God is distant from His creation, that He's an absentee landlord, He has set it off into the cosmos and has left it to itself. The idea that God took a direct action in creating us, that He is in fact our Creator. There's a great debate going on today over the creation evolution, yet the Declaration of Independence is on the creation side of the debate. You wonder how in the nation's public schools that the Declaration of Independence can be taught in the history classroom, and yet when you get into the science classroom, they cannot mention the idea that there's any creation possible. Even in the idea of an impersonal creator, as in the intelligent design movement. And so Brooke Allen really doesn't have a leg to stand on when we look at the evidence. And so why does she make such a dogmatic and all-inclusive claim? She has to. If she allows anything of God in America's founding, then every anti-Christian court ruling falls. And so she has to make a statement regarding this absolute getting rid of God, placing Him out of the founding of America. Now, what is she counting on when she does this? She's counting on most Americans being ignorant of the subject. And of course, she would be right. Most Americans have no idea of the founding of America. It was years ago that they studied history, and because the history textbooks have changed so much over the years, and there has been a steady dilution of the religious founding of America, most Americans are in fact ignorant on the subject. She's counting on history textbooks, leaving out the religious history of America. And this is, in fact, has happened. History textbooks today are governed by two states, California and Texas. And so the textbook in your state is really governed by how the textbooks are to be written for the states like California and Texas. And the reason for this is that putting textbooks together is very expensive. And the two largest states that have public school populations are Texas and California. And generally, California carries the day. And so you're going to see textbook committees writing textbooks in order for them to be accepted in California. And California has, in most cases, diluted the Christian founding of America and has left out more and more of the specifics of this. So over a period of time, you're going to find young people not having any indication of the history of America, and they're going to have to find it somewhere else. She's also counting on most Americans not caring about the history of their country. And one of the things in growing up, I found that most young people are not that interested in history. It's something what old people did, and they don't want to have any association with anything that's old. We live in a very contemporary, forward-moving, futuristic society. Studying the history is something that they feel is just something they have to get through. And so there really isn't a great deal of knowledge about the founding documents and the founding principles of America, and that creates a problem for us in order to identify current trends and how history is moving and how courts are beginning to rule. Now, in order to refute her claim further, all one needs to do is study original documents of America's founding. And so I've gone back and looked at a number of documents, and I'm dealing with her case that the mention of God is a very late addition to America's history. And yet all of the statements in so many documents indicate that she's just wrong about this. Let me just go through a list of these to give you some idea of how prevalent the mention of God and His attributes are in official documents. You'll find Almighty God, nature's God, God of armies, Lord of hosts, His goodness, providence. Providence appears in a number of different forms. The providence of God, God's superintending providence, supreme and universal providence, overruling providence of God. These statements alone are further indication, further evidence that our founding fathers were not the corporate nature of our founding fathers, the going across the board, were in fact not deists. You don't talk about the providence of God if in fact you're a deist. There is a creator of all. You will find this phrase, indulgent creator, great governor of the world, the divinity, supreme disposer of all events, Holy Ghost. Even Jesus Christ is mentioned. There are a number of proclamations for prayer and thanksgiving, which are very specifically Christian documents and referencing our sins and calling upon Jesus Christ as forgiveness of our sins. You will find a Christian religion mentioned throughout many documents. Christian forbearance, love, and charity, free Protestant colonies, Christian state, our Lord, supreme ruler of the universe, supreme ruler of nations, and of course the generic word for God, just God Himself. So over and over again, you are going to find that our documents express these truths about the religious founding of America. And it's amazing to me that someone like Brooke Allen and other secularists and atheists out there can make these claims because the evidence is there for all to see, especially in this internet age when all of this information is available to most people. Now, so this list is a direct refutation of Allen's claim. She does not name any prominent atheist who had any impact on America's founding. And she even admits that Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and even Thomas Paine believed in God. So even the most skeptical pillars of her position weren't atheists. They all believed in God. And in fact, I suspect that if you took some of the writings of these men, and I've got one here by Benjamin Franklin, and if you took that and took Benjamin Franklin's name off of it and tried to get that read in a public school, you would have the ACLU there within a New York minute. They would be denouncing this as propaganda, as religious propaganda, and even if we were to point out that this was Benjamin Franklin, while they might back off a little bit, they would still say we can't have this. And so there is a great deal of subversion going on in our schools across the country because young people aren't getting the truth. And this is 6 weeks before Benjamin Franklin died. He wrote a letter to the president of Yale College, Ezra Stiles, and he said the following: "Here is my creed. I believe in one God, creator of the universe, that he governs it by his providence, that he ought to be worshipped, that the most acceptable service we render to him is doing good to his other children, that the soul of man is immortal and will be treated with justice in another life, respecting its conduct in this. These I take to be the fundamental points in all sound religion, and I regard them as you do in whatever sect I meet with them." Now, this is a statement that probably wouldn't pass muster in an Orthodox, Christian Orthodox sense, because it does seem to tout the idea of works salvation. But the idea that God exists, that he is a judge, and there is a judgment at the end of time, is something that could never be found in a public school today, even though Benjamin Franklin said it. And I suspect that Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Adams, and others, and even Thomas Paine, would go along with this. So we've come a long way from the skeptics of the founding of America to where we are today. And young people are not getting the truth about the history of our nation. And so it's obvious that Franklin believed in God as the creator and governor of the cosmos. And again, these are hardly deistic beliefs. And to choose Franklin as a champion of secularism is rather humorous, given the fact that his creedal statement cannot be recited in our nation's public schools because of its many religious statements. In fact, here is the Regent's prayer from 1962 in the Engel versus Vitale decision. This is the decision that removed prayer from public schools. This is what the prayer said, and you can compare that with what Benjamin Franklin said in his creedal statement to Ezra Stiles just before Franklin had died. "Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country." It's a pretty innocuous prayer. Benjamin Franklin could have said it. Thomas Jefferson could have said it. Thomas Paine could have said it. John Adams could have said it. Every American founder could have said this, and in fact did say things like this. And so it's not out of the historical context of our nation for something like this to be permitted in the public schools, because this was the founding of America. This is what people, in fact, believed. Then there's Thomas Paine, and Thomas Paine is always brought up as an American founder, and we'll talk a little bit more about him later. But Allen states that Thomas Paine's rhetoric was so fervent that he was inevitably branded as an atheist. Of course, Paine was not an atheist in the usual definition of the term. His anti-Christian book, The Age of Reason, which was written in the 1790s, opened with this statement: "I believe in one God." So Thomas Paine, who's probably the most skeptical of the founders, and his Age of Reason used as a secular Bible today, even he was a theist. Even he believed in God. Now, why Paine is singled out as a founding father is a mystery, since he had no part in any founding document. And Paine's later religious views forced Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams to distance themselves from his positions. Now, of course, he is most famous because of his booklet, his pamphlet, Common Sense, which was written in February of 1776, and was an apologetic, was a defense for a war for independence, breaking away from Great Britain because of the type of draconian laws that were being imposed upon the colonies by England. But what's interesting about Common Sense, if you read it, you'll note that there are some very specific references to the Bible in there. In particular, you're going to find Judges chapter 8, you're going to find 1 Samuel chapter 8, and then a reference to Matthew chapter 22, verse 21, where Jesus says, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And he goes references in Judges chapter 8, Gideon, when the people wanted to make Gideon a king, he dismissed this. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, when the people wanted a king like all the other nations, God gave them what they wanted. And it wasn't something that God had approved, but if this is the type of rulership you want, if this is the type of government you want, I'll give it to you. You live with the consequences of it. And so what Thomas Paine did, he's made his argument for why England's monarchy was a tyranny, and he used the Bible to make his case. And some historians have stated that if he had not appealed to the Bible, he never would have made his case. And so Common Sense, 1776, Age of Reason, 1790s, Paine was really living off of his popular capital because of Common Sense. But by the time he wrote The Age of Reason in the 1790s, most of his friends had distanced themselves from him because his views on religion were out of accord with the majority of the nation, even by some of the most skeptical of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson being one of them. So when we look at this particular issue, we have to keep in mind that there are more than 4 founding fathers. And almost all of the books you find that are skeptical about the Christian influence on America will go back to, again, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Adams, and Thomas Paine. But there were many, many more. I mean, the signers, there were more than 50 signers of the Declaration of Independence and many signers of the Constitution. But these 4 seem to become the pillars of what constitutes America's founding principles. And yet there were many, many more, most of whom were Christian, who were involved in this founding process as well. So a further study of American history will show that there were many founders who were outspoken Christians who are rarely, if ever, mentioned by historical revisionists. And the reason that they aren't mentioned by historical revisionists is because their views go against their understanding of the founding of America. Let me just go through a few of these, and again, the list of this could go on for hours, and the documentation for this could be just as long. So let me just pick out a few of them to give you some indication of what these men believed. John Dickinson was a lawyer, militia officer during the American Revolution. He was a Continental Congressman from Pennsylvania and Delaware. He was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. He was president of Delaware and Pennsylvania, and he stated the following: governments could not give the rights essential to happiness. We claim them from a higher source, from the King of Kings and Lord of all the earth. There's Charles Pickney, was a founder of the American Bible Society. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And here are the final words on his last will and testament. To the eternal and only true God be all honor and glory now and forever. Amen. Roger Sherman, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And he's one of my favorite founding fathers because he saw some of the early problems with the Constitution and how the consequences of things that are left out of the Constitution would affect us today. Even to the point of saying, if we don't make direct reference to the God of the Bible in the Constitution, a day may come when we can elect atheists and Muslims to political office to such an extent that they could end up taking over our own country. So he saw this back in the 18th century and saw what we are beginning to experience today. And here are some of the beliefs of Roger Sherman. He says, I believe there is only one living and true God existing in 3 persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, the same in substance, equal in power and glory. That the scriptures of the Old and New Testaments are a revelation from God and a complete rule to direct us how we may glorify and enjoy Him. And in correspondence with Samuel Hopkins, he wrote the following: "It is the duty of all to acknowledge that the divine law which requires us to love God with all our heart and our neighbor as ourselves, on pain of eternal damnation, is holy, just, and good. The revealed law of God is the rule of our duty." John Witherspoon, who taught at what is today Princeton, was a Presbyterian minister. He signed the Declaration of Independence and helped draft the Articles of Confederation. He was twice elected to the New Jersey legislature, and he strongly supported the adoption of the United States Constitution during the New Jersey ratification process. And so here you have a minister of the gospel, probably one of the most prominent ministers of the gospel, taught at Princeton, taught many of the founders, and was a participant in the drafting of these early documents. Again, his name hardly ever comes up in any discussion. Samuel Adams, he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, ratifier of the U.S. Constitution, and the governor of Massachusetts. And here's what he said in a proclamation for a day of prayer and fasting in 1793. "We may with one heart and voice humbly implore his gracious and free pardon through Jesus Christ, supplicating his divine aid. And above all, to cause the religion of Jesus Christ in its true spirit to spread far and wide till the whole earth shall be filled with his glory." Now, as you can see by these statements, how could someone like Brooke Allen attempt to fool us into believing that God is a late addition in the founding of America? He was the center of it, going all the way back to Jamestown, all the way up through the colonial charters, the state constitutions, calling for days of prayer and thanksgiving. You begin to see that a case for this just cannot be made by these dogmatic statements that are made. Again, they are counting on us being ignorant of these types of things, and they get away with it because we are ignorant. Joseph Story is another person we need to keep in mind. Joseph Story had a long, illustrious career as a judge, wrote a commentary on the Constitution of the United States. He served on the United States Supreme Court. He was appointed by James Madison. And here's what he has to say about the impact of Christianity on the common law. He wrote, "One of the beautiful boasts of our municipal jurisprudence is that Christianity is part of the common law. There never has been a period in which the common law did not recognize Christianity as lying at its foundation." And so the common law, which came from England, he was asking the question and doing the research on this and said, what is the source of all of this? And many scholars would say, many scholars don't like this assertion that the common law, much of it was based upon Christianity. He goes on to say, "I believe that Christianity is necessary to support a civil society and shall ever attend to its institutions and acknowledge its precepts as the pure and natural source of private and social happiness." Essentially stating, look, if you don't have Christianity, you're not going to have a civil society. And this is something I believe that even a skeptic like Thomas Jefferson understood, that if you don't have Christianity, you don't really have a just society. There is no basis for morality outside of a Christian worldview. Now, why don't these men count? Why do we only hear of Franklin, Jefferson, Madison, and Adams? And I think the answer for this is quite clear. If you go beyond these men, you begin to see that they really can't make, the skeptics of our day cannot make the case that America was designed as a secular nation. Now, as I've pointed out, and some people on this topic will not admit this, there are problems with the founding of America. There were seeds planted that many people did not see what sort of rotten fruit would result from it. And so my position on this has been to say you have to be honest on both sides of the equation. There were skeptics. There were some deistic beliefs. There were certainly Unitarians who did not believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ. And then there were the bringing in of Enlightenment principles, but as we've already stated, the Enlightenment was tempered in the colonies and in the states and during the period of the drafting of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution by Christianity. And the idea that the Enlightenment was somehow based upon atheistic beliefs in America is just unfounded. The use of reason and rational argumentation, the natural sciences were all a part of the Christian worldview. So we have to tell the truth on both sides of this. Yes, there are skeptics on one side of the spectrum, and there are Bible-believing Christians on the other side of the spectrum. And you can see how the skeptics really had to capitulate and give in to basic Christian fundamental beliefs. Even when Thomas Jefferson cut up the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and took out all the miraculous elements in those Gospel accounts, he didn't publish this while he was alive. Because he was already being described as an infidel during his election process. So Christianity did in fact prevail during this period. Now I want to touch on one other founding father who gets very little attention and yet had a prominent role in the founding of America at the state level and at the federal level, and that's Elias Boudinot, who lived from 1740 to 1821. He was a lawyer, served 3 congressional terms representing New Jersey. He was a delegate to the Continental Congress and provided as president of the Congress during that time from 1782 to 1783. So he was essentially the president of the United States at that period of time, and there were a number of these intermediary presidents during that period of time. So he is a true founding father. It goes further than that. He was one of the designers of the Great Seal of the United States. He served as the director of the United States Mint from 1795 until 1805. When he retired from politics, he became a trustee at Princeton, what is now Princeton University. He was one of the founders of the Natural History Department there. He was an early opponent of slavery, and this led him to found the American Bible Society in 1816, and he served as its president until his death in 1821. And one of the things that he did that gets very little attention, remember Thomas Paine wrote The Age of Reason, and today it's all over the internet, gets all types of attention because it is a critique of the Christian worldview. It's a critique of the Bible, and skeptics love to appeal to it. Sam Harris even wrote a book similar to what Thomas Paine had written. Sam Harris is a famous atheist today. And his Age of Reason, Paine's Age of Reason, really went unanswered in the colonies until Elias Boudinot came up and wrote a book called The Age of Revelation. And when you read this particular book, which has been republished, you can begin to see what a great scholar Boudinot was. He went through very meticulously through the Age of Reason and dealt with a number of Paine's arguments. And it was first written, the early draft of this was first written as a pamphlet to his daughter. This was done in 1795. In a letter to his daughter, Boudinot described his motives for critiquing Paine's critique of the Bible. He says, "This awful consequence created some alarm in my mind, lest at any future day you, my beloved child, might take up this plausible address of infidelity," speaking of Paine's book, "and for want of an answer at hand to his subtle insinuations, might suffer even a doubt of the truth as it is in Jesus. To penetrate your mind, I therefore determined to put my thoughts on the subject of this pamphlet on paper for your edification and information when I shall be no more. I have endeavored to detect his falsehoods and misrepresentations and to show his extreme ignorance of the divine scriptures, not knowing that they are the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth." And so Boudinot says, look, I'm going to write this for you. I don't want to leave you without some answer to this. You might pick it up. You might be engrossed by it, and not having any way to compare what he says with the truth, I've written this to you. Well, he later then expanded it into book form, Again, like I had mentioned, it is back in print. In fact, American Vision has published it, and it's called The Age of Revelation. And so you find that Payne's book gets all the attention, but the fact is, the Paine was not an official delegate in any other way, except that he was in France on one occasion as an elective office. But here in the United States, Boudinot was a true founding father. His beliefs represented more of America than Paine's did at the time. And yet the skeptics appealed to Paine over against Boudinot. In fact, in all the research I've done on this, very few books even mention Boudinot in his book in response to Thomas Paine's book. And one other element about Boudinot, which I think is extremely important, which kind of encapsulates all this. Boudinot was there when they drafted the First Amendment. And it was Boudinot who called for a resolution asking for a day of prayer and thanksgiving. This is after the drafting of the First Amendment to the Constitution. The First Amendment is the so-called separation of church and state amendment. Of course, that language is not in there. The First Amendment states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so on the day after the House of Representatives voted to adopt the First Amendment, Boudinot proposed a resolution asking President Washington to issue this day of prayer and thanksgiving. And this is what the resolution stated, that a joint committee of both houses be directed to wait upon the President of the United States to request that he would recommend to the people of the United States a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors of Almighty God, especially by affording them an opportunity peaceably to establish a constitution of government for their safety and happiness. And so the skeptics and the atheists of our day would have us believe that the First Amendment of the Constitution was to strip every vestige of religion from our government. And yet, right after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Boudinot says we need to thank God for having us to peaceably assemble, so that we need to thank Him for making that possible. So the logic of this is simple, according to the skeptics, that Boudinot thanked God and wanted the American people to thank God so that they could kick God out of our nation, which absolutely makes no sense. Well, this resolution passed, and this a day of thanksgiving was in fact implemented, and it was a thanksgiving to acknowledge that it was Almighty God who had afforded them the opportunity peaceably to establish a constitution of government for our safety and happiness. And so when you go back and look at the founding documents of our nation, when you look at the statements of some of our founders, you begin to see that there's a broader spectrum of who those founders were, and there's a broader spectrum of truth as to what those founders believed. And the majority of them casting a long shadow over people like Madison and John Adams and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine, gave their understanding of our nation and its founding to a belief in the God of the Bible and of the Bible itself.